My name is Lisa Holder. I am a civil rights attorney. My practice focuses on police abuse cases, employment discrimination, education equity, and I am an appointee to the Reparations Task Force. The groundwork has been laid for generations, decades in the US. African Americans and descendants of slavery started to push for reparations immediately upon emancipation. Everyone's heard of 40 acres and a mule. That was the first known push toward reparations. And then in the 20th century, there was a huge reparations movement that was propelled by Marcus Garvey and gave the issue of reparations tremendous notoriety and momentum. In the state of California, specifically, one of our amazing legislators, who is now the Secretary of State in California, Dr. Shirley Weber, at the time she was in the Assembly, a member of the Black Caucus, she took up the mantle for reparations and pushed through both houses a bill called AB 3121 that allowed the state to convene a task force of 9 people to study the case for reparations. Real people come and give testimony to the task force, and they relate to the task force how they have been impacted on an everyday level by racism and the continuing legacy of white supremacy. So at our last hearing, for example, we had Mr. Austin, who explained to us how his house was appraised at $500,000 less than its actual value. He's African American. He knows about this discrepancy because he asked a white person to stand in, and the appraisal value of his home went up by $500,000. In one of our hearings, we had the people from the Bruce family and their advocates come and talk to us about Bruce's Beach, which is a massive plot of land in one of the wealthiest areas in Southern California, Manhattan Beach. And that massive plot of land currently sits there unused. But that land actually originally was owned by African Americans who had, in the 1920s, bought this land, developed it, and created a beachfront property, like a hotel, for African Americans. The Bruce family was pushed out, racially terrorized by the residents of Manhattan Beach and by the government. And eventually the government took away that property from the Bruce family through a process known as eminent domain, as a way of making sure that that area was exclusively white. Now, this family has lost billions of dollars of wealth and has not been able to meet many of their basic needs.
My name is Dr. Cheryl Grills. I'm a professor of psychology at Loyola Marymount University and director of the Psychology Applied Research Center there, and a member of the Reparations Task Force in California. So when people think about reparations, they often start thinking about, okay, well, what was the harm? And they think about harm in terms of economics, blocked access to things like housing and education, et cetera. What they don't always think about is the psychological harm, the emotional harm, the community harm that can happen across generations when one is dealing with systemic or structural racism and the heinous system of enslavement. I think the thing that I'm seeing are the deep scars emotionally that have resulted from this exposure to racism. The level of, how do I put it, disempowerment, if you will, the level of oppression, the level of intense response that's necessary, that's exhausting and necessary from an individual and from a family and from communities to counteract the negative narrative about who we are as Black people. It is absolutely exhausting, and it wears and tears on the very fiber of our being.
We will be bringing forth evidence-based recommendations based on 2 years of gathering evidence of the impact of original systems of oppression like slavery and Jim Crow segregation, and the continuing and ongoing systems of oppression that we're seeing in institutional racism and structural racism. We're gathering the evidence, and the evidence will be unassailable.
We don't live in a vacuum. So Black folks have got to be able to trust that as they do their work of healing, which needs to be part of reparations, the rest of the society is doing its work to do healing. So if we start healing, but we're still in a race-infected society that has not done its own work, then reparations will only be half achieved.